The billionaire spoke in Arabic, and only the janitor's daughter responded, silencing the room and saving the CEO's million-dollar contract. What happened next surprised everyone. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The mahogany conference table gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of Blackwood Industries' executive boardroom. Richard Blackwood, CEO and founder, adjusted his silk tie nervously as he watched the most important client of his career settle into the leather chair across from him. Ahmad al-Rashid, the petroleum billionaire whose investment could save Richard's struggling tech company, commanded attention simply by existing in the space. "Mr. al-Rashid, we're honored by your presence," Richard began, his voice betraying the desperation he tried so hard to conceal. The quarterly report sitting in his desk drawer painted a grim picture. 6 months until bankruptcy, maybe less. Ahmad smiled politely but said nothing. His dark eyes surveyed the room, taking in every detail. When he finally spoke, the melodic Arabic words flowed like poetry, but they might as well have been ancient hieroglyphics to everyone present. Richard's face flushed red. His head of international affairs, Jennifer Martinez, shifted uncomfortably beside him. The interpreter they'd hired had called in sick that morning, leaving them stranded in this crucial moment. I apologize, Mr. al-Rashid," Richard stammered. "Our translator is unfortunately unavailable today. Perhaps we could reschedule." Ahmad's expression darkened. He spoke again in Arabic, his tone more urgent, almost pleading. Richard felt his life's work slipping through his fingers like sand. 20 years of building this company, gone because of a language barrier. That's when the conference room door creaked open. "Oh, I'm so sorry." A young woman in a simple blue dress and worn sneakers stood frozen in the doorway, a mop bucket in her hands. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes widened with embarrassment. "I didn't know there was a meeting. I'll come back later." "Sarah, what are you doing here?" Richard snapped, recognizing Tom Mitchell's daughter. The girl worked part-time, helping her father with the janitorial duties while studying at the community college. But Ahmad al-Rashid was staring at Sarah with an expression Richard had never seen before. The billionaire spoke again, his voice carrying a note of urgency that transcended language. To everyone's shock, Sarah responded in perfect, fluent Arabic. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Richard's mouth hung open as he watched this 20-year-old girl, this janitor's daughter, engage in animated conversation with one of the world's wealthiest men. After several minutes, Sarah turned to Richard, her cheeks still flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Blackwood, Mr. al-Rashid was asking about your new solar panel technology. He's very interested in investing, but he wanted to know if you understand the cultural implications of bringing this technology to Middle Eastern markets." Richard blinked rapidly, trying to process what he was witnessing. You speak Arabic?" "I told him you're not just another American businessman looking to make a quick profit," Sarah continued, ignoring his question. "I explained that you genuinely want to help communities access clean energy. He's ready to sign the contract." Ahmad smiled warmly at Sarah, speaking once more in Arabic. She nodded and turned back to Richard. "He'll invest $50 million, but he has one condition." Richard's heart hammered against his ribs. "What condition?" "He wants to meet with you again tomorrow, and he wants me to translate." As the meeting concluded, and Ahmad left with promises to return, Richard stood alone with Sarah in the now empty conference room. The weight of what had just happened settled on his shoulders, but something else nagged at him. How did a janitor's daughter become fluent in Arabic? "Sarah," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Adul, but when he looked into her green eyes, he saw something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't just intelligence or hidden talent. It was recognition, and fear. What secret was Sarah Mitchell hiding? And why did Richard suddenly feel like he'd just opened Pandora's box? Sarah Mitchell stood frozen in the conference room doorway, her cleaning supplies forgotten as Richard Blackwood's piercing stare bore into her. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with the weight of unspoken questions and dangerous answers. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany table where, just moments ago, one of the world's most powerful men had sat. The air still carried a faint trace of Ahmad al-Rashid's expensive cologne, a reminder of the moment that had changed everything. "Close the door, Sarah," Richard said quietly, his voice carefully controlled. Her hands trembled as she set down the mop bucket, the plastic handle slipping from her sweaty palms. The heavy door clicked shut with a finality that made her stomach clench. She'd never been alone with the CEO before, never been anything more than invisible background to these powerful people who ran in circles she could never imagine entering. "Sit down." Richard gestured to one of the leather chairs, the same one where Ahmad al-Rashid had sat just minutes ago. Sarah perched on the edge of the seat, her worn work dress a stark contrast to the expensive leather. Her sneakers squeaked against the marble floor, the sound abnormally loud in the hushed atmosphere of the executive boardroom. She felt completely out of place in this world of power suits and million-dollar deals, like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into a lion's den. "Where did you learn to speak Arabic like that?" Richard asked, moving to stand by the windows, his silhouette dark against the Chicago skyline. Sarah's throat felt dry as sandpaper. Her mother's dying words echoed in her memory, spoken in Arabic through labored breaths. "Never tell them about the languages, Habibti. Promise me, our secrets die with us, or they will kill us all." I studied it in school," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. The words tasted bitter on her tongue, another lie added to the mountain of deception that had shaped her entire life. Richard turned from the window, his experienced businessman's eyes never leaving her face. She could see him cataloguing every nervous gesture, every tell that betrayed her fear. "Sarah, I've spent 20 years building this company from nothing. I've negotiated with oil sheiks, technology moguls, and government officials from 6 different continents. I can tell when someone is lying to me." A bead of sweat rolled down Sarah's spine, despite the air conditioning that kept the boardroom at a constant 70 degrees. Through those same floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the Chicago skyline stretching endlessly toward the horizon, a reminder of how vast and dangerous the world really was, how small and vulnerable she felt in this moment. "My mother taught me," she finally admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Your mother?" Richard's eyebrows rose slightly, genuine surprise flickering across his features. Tom never mentioned his wife spoke Arabic. In fact, I was under the impression he was a widower. Sarah's chest tightened, each breath becoming more difficult. Every word felt like stepping deeper into quicksand, pulling her further from the safety of anonymity that had protected her for so many years. "She died when I was 12. Richard's expression softened, the hard businessman facade cracking slightly, to reveal genuine compassion. "I'm sorry for your loss, Sarah. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was." The words came out sharper than she intended, filled with years of buried grief and carefully hidden pain. What was her name? The question hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Sarah felt the weight of 15 years of secrets pressing down on her shoulders, threatening to crush her beneath their burden. One word, one name, that's all it would take to shatter the carefully constructed life she and her father had built. She could still turn back, she realized. Still maintain the lie, still protect the secret her mother had died to keep safe. But looking into Richard's eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Kindness. And perhaps understanding. "Helena," she whispered, the name feeling foreign on her lips after so many years of silence. Something flickered across Richard's face, recognition perhaps, or the first stirrings of fear. He leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the conference table, his body language shifting from curiosity to acute alertness. "Helena what, Sarah?" But before she could answer, Richard's phone buzzed insistently against the polished wood. He glanced at the screen, and his face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks as if he'd seen a ghost. "We need to continue this conversation later," he said abruptly, standing up so quickly his chair rolled backward. "Go home, Sarah. Don't talk to anyone about what happened here today. Anyone. Do you understand me?" As Sarah hurried toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs, Richard's voice stopped her cold. "Sarah, be very, very careful. I have a feeling your mother's death wasn't as simple as you think." The words followed her out of the boardroom like a curse, confirming her deepest, most terrifying suspicions. Sarah's hands shook as she pushed the lobby button for the service elevator, Richard's ominous warning echoing in her mind like a death knell. Your mother's death wasn't as simple as you think. The elevator creaked and groaned as it descended to the parking garage, each floor passing in a blur of fluorescent lights and concrete walls. She'd taken this same elevator hundreds of times over the past 2 years, but tonight it felt different. Claustrophobic, like a coffin descending into the earth. The parking garage stretched out before her in pools of harsh light and deep shadows, filled with the expensive cars of executives who made more in a month than she and her father made in a year. She found Tom Mitchell in the far corner, methodically emptying waste baskets with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades in service jobs. At 58, her father looked older than his years, his shoulders permanently stooped from decades of manual labor. His hair had gone completely gray in the 5 years since they'd moved to Chicago. Another city, another fresh start, another set of carefully crafted lies about who they really were and where they'd come from. "Dad," Sarah said softly, her voice barely carrying across the empty garage. Tom looked up from his work, immediately sensing the tension radiating from his daughter like heat from a fever. His weathered face, marked by years of worry and sleepless nights, creased with concern. "What is it, sweetheart? You look like you've seen a ghost. Someone knows about Mom." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Tom dropped the trash bag he'd been holding, its contents scattering across the oil-stained concrete floor in a cascade of paper and plastic. His face went white as he grabbed Sarah's shoulders with hands that trembled despite their strength. "What did you say? Who knows? How much do they know?" "Mr. Blackwood, I had to speak Arabic today. There was this businessman and I couldn't just stand there and watch the deal fall apart and—" "No." Tom shook his head violently, his eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from years of looking over your shoulder. "No, no, no. Sarah, what have you done?" Behind them, the parking garage's fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with lives of their own. In the distance, Sarah heard the soft purr of an expensive car engine, though she couldn't see any vehicles moving through the maze of concrete pillars and parked cars. "Dad, you're scaring me." Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Tom's eyes darted around the shadowy garage, searching for threats that might be lurking in every corner. "Listen to me very carefully, Sarah. We need to leave Chicago. Tonight. Pack only what you absolutely need." "But why? What aren't you telling me about Mom? What really happened to her?" Tom's eyes filled with pain so deep it seemed to reach into his soul. When he spoke, his voice cracked with 15 years of suppressed grief and guilt. "Your mother didn't die in a car accident, Sarah. She was murdered." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and making the garage spin around her. The carefully constructed story of her childhood, the tragic accident, the grieving widower, the need to start fresh in a new city, crumbled like a house of cards. Murdered? But why? She wasn't just anything, Tom interrupted, his voice harsh with desperation. Helena was. She was someone very important. Someone that powerful people wanted dead. Someone whose very existence threatened billions of dollars and decades of carefully constructed lies. A car door slammed somewhere in the garage, the sound echoing off concrete walls like a gunshot. Tom grabbed Sarah's hand with bruising force, his calloused palm slick with sweat. "We're leaving. Now." Before they what, Dad? Who are they? But Tom was already pulling her toward the exit, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. As they hurried through the maze of parked cars, Sarah caught a glimpse of a figure in an expensive suit standing beside a black sedan, partially hidden behind a concrete pillar. Even in the dim light, she could see he was speaking quietly into a phone, his eyes tracking their movement. The hunter had found his prey. Their years of hiding, of carefully constructed anonymity, were over. As they reached Tom's battered pickup truck, Sarah turned back for one last look. The man in the suit raised his phone, and she heard the soft click of a camera shutter capturing her image. They drove into the Chicago night with the weight of the past pressing down on them like a storm cloud, and Sarah knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah barely slept that night in the cramped motel room on the outskirts of Chicago. The neon sign outside their window flickered intermittently, casting red and blue shadows across the water-stained ceiling, while Tom sat in a chair by the door, sleepless and alert like a guard dog protecting his pack. Every time a car pulled into the parking lot, her father's hand would move instinctively to the baseball bat he kept beside his chair. A reminder that their life had always been balanced on the edge of violence, even when Sarah was too young to understand why. At sunrise, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Richard Blackwood's name appeared on the cracked screen, and her heart jumped. "Sarah, I need to see you. It's urgent." "Mr. Blackwood, my father says we need to leave the city. He thinks—" "Don't." Richard's voice cut through her words with razor-sharp intensity. "Don't leave, don't run, don't do anything until we talk. I spent all night making calls, calling in favors I'll probably regret using. Meet me at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street in 1 hour. Come alone." "I can't leave my father. He's terrified that—" "Sarah, I know who your mother was. I know what happened to her. And if you run now, you'll spend the rest of your life running. Meet me, trust me." 1 hour. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in the dim morning light, filtering through thin curtains. An hour later, she slid into a cracked vinyl booth across from Richard Blackwood, who looked like he hadn't slept any more than she had. The diner smelled of coffee and bacon grease, filled with the quiet murmur of truckers and night shift workers grabbing breakfast before heading home to collapse. Richard's expensive suit looked absurdly out of place among the blue-collar crowd, but he seemed oblivious to the stares he was attracting. His attention was focused entirely on Sarah, studying her face as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "My father thinks you're going to get me killed," Sarah replied, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup for warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Richard winced visibly. "Sarah, I spent all night making phone calls to people I haven't spoken to in years, calling in favors, asking questions I probably shouldn't ask. What I found—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. He slid a manila folder across the sticky formica table, his hands trembling slightly. Sarah's own hands shook as she opened it, not knowing that her life was about to change forever. Inside was a photograph that made her world tilt off its axis. It showed her mother, but not the Helena Mitchell she remembered, the tired woman who worked double shifts at the hospital, who spoke Arabic in whispers when she thought Sarah was asleep, who died too young in what everyone said was a tragic accident. This woman wore designer clothes that probably cost more than Sarah's family had ever owned, jewelry that sparkled with the fire of genuine diamonds and precious stones. She stood beside a man in traditional Middle Eastern dress, both of them radiant with wealth and power, the opulent surroundings behind them speaking of a lifestyle Sarah could barely comprehend. "Your mother wasn't just Helena Mitchell, the hospital worker who married an American journalist," Richard said quietly, watching Sarah's reaction with careful attention. "She was Helena al-Rashid, sister to Ahmad al-Rashid, the man you spoke to yesterday." Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering against the linoleum floor in a cascade of ceramic shards and steaming liquid. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet diner, but she barely noticed. The breakfast chatter around them faded into white noise as the implications crashed over her like a tsunami. "That's impossible," she whispered, though even as she spoke, pieces of her childhood began falling into place like puzzle pieces she'd never understood before. "The man you saved my company with yesterday? Ahmad al-Rashid? He's your uncle, Sarah. And if my sources are correct, and they usually are, your mother was heir to one of the largest petroleum fortunes in the world." Sarah stared at the photograph, seeing her own green eyes reflected in her mother's face, recognizing features she'd inherited but never understood the significance of. Suddenly, the years of moving from city to city, the false names, her father's constant paranoia, the way her mother would sometimes stare into the distance with such profound sadness, it all made terrible, perfect sense. "She gave it all up," Sarah said, her voice hollow with understanding. "For love, for my father." "Ah, and someone killed her for it," Richard replied grimly, his own voice heavy with the weight of this revelation. Through the diner's grimy window, Sarah spotted a familiar black sedan parked across the street. A man in a dark suit stood beside it, not even trying to hide the fact that he was watching the diner, watching them. The hunters were no longer hiding. The game had entered a new, far more dangerous phase. "Mr. Blackwood," Sarah said slowly, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins, "I think we're about to have company." The man in the dark suit entered Murphy's diner with the fluid confidence of a predator who owned whatever territory he chose to claim. He was tall and distinguished, with silver hair perfectly styled and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. His smile was practiced and empty, the kind of expression that looked warm from a distance, but revealed its calculated nature up close. Every conversation in the diner seemed to quiet as he approached their booth, as if the other patrons could sense the danger radiating from him like heat from a fire. Sarah felt her skin crawl as he slid uninvited into their booth, his movements precise and controlled. "Richard," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, but carrying undertones of steel. "And you must be the famous Sarah Mitchell." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. This man knew her name, knew exactly where to find her, had probably been tracking her movements for longer than she wanted to imagine. How many days, weeks, months had he been watching her clean offices and attend classes, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal himself? "James Harrison," Richard said tightly, his jaw clenched with barely controlled anger. "Sarah, this is a member of my board of directors." James Harrison extended his hand across the table, his manicured fingers speaking of wealth and leisure, but Sarah didn't take it. Instead, she studied his face with the intensity her mother had taught her, memorizing every detail. Helena had always said that knowledge was survival, that understanding your enemy was the first step toward defeating them. "Such a shame about your mother," Harrison said conversationally, settling back in the booth as if he belonged there. "Helena was a truly remarkable woman, beautiful, intelligent, and stubborn to a fault, very much like you, I imagine." "You knew my mother?" Sarah's voice was barely controlled, each word carefully measured to hide the fury building inside her chest. Oh yes, we were well acquainted. I represented certain business interests during her difficulties. 15 years ago, beautiful woman, but she made some very poor choices. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his businessman's instincts clearly screaming warnings. James, what do you want? Why are you here? Harrison signaled the waitress for coffee, taking his time before answering, savoring the moment like a cat playing with wounded prey. When the steaming mug arrived, he wrapped his hands around it and smiled that cold, empty smile again. I represent certain interests in the Middle Eastern petroleum industry, Richard, interests that were significantly affected by Helena's romantic choices 15 years ago. Affected how? Sarah demanded, her mother's training in multiple languages having also included lessons in reading people, in detecting lies and threats. Harrison's smile widened, revealing perfectly white teeth that somehow made him look more predatory, not less. Your mother's disappearance created certain legal complications regarding the Al-Rashid family assets, billions of dollars in oil rights, real estate holdings, and international investments. Complications that were eventually resolved through great effort and considerable expense. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs as the full scope of what he was suggesting became clear. You're saying she was murdered for money, she said flatly. I'm saying that business is business, my dear. And when someone threatens to destabilize billions of dollars in carefully structured assets. He shrugged eloquently, as if discussing the weather rather than the calculated murder of an innocent woman. Harrison reached into his expensive jacket and placed a legal document on the table. The papers crisp and official-looking, heavy with the weight of corporate law and international finance. A simple renunciation of any claim to the Al-Rashid estate, he explained, his tone becoming more businesslike. Sign this, and you can live a normal life, Sarah. Continue your education, marry, have children. No one will bother you again. You can disappear back into anonymity, just as your mother should have done. Sarah looked down at the document, her mother's name printed at the top in stark black letters, along with dollar amounts that made her dizzy. The numbers represented more money than she could comprehend, more wealth than entire countries possessed. And if I don't sign? Harrison's facade finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation that had always lurked beneath the surface. His eyes became flat and lifeless, like a shark's, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Then you'll discover that Chicago can be a very dangerous city, particularly for young women who walk alone at night. Accidents happen, my dear. They happen with disturbing regularity to people who make poor choices. Richard started to stand, his face flushed with anger, but Harrison's hand shot out like a striking snake, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Sit down, Richard. Your company's survival depends entirely on your cooperation in this matter. I trust you won't let misplaced heroics destroy everything you've worked so hard to build. Sarah stared at this man who had just threatened her life with the casual indifference of someone ordering breakfast. She thought of her mother, murdered for trying to claim what was rightfully hers. She thought of her father, worn down by years of fear and constant vigilance. She thought of all the years of running, hiding, pretending to be someone she wasn't. Then she thought of Ahmad al-Rashid, the uncle she'd never known existed, and the recognition she'd seen in his eyes when she'd spoken Arabic in that conference room. I need time to think, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. Harrison smiled again, that cold, predatory expression that didn't reach his eyes. Of course, my dear, but don't take too long. My associates aren't known for their patience, and they have investments to protect. He stood to leave, straightening his expensive suit jacket with practiced ease. Then he paused, as if remembering something unimportant. Oh, and Sarah, your father had a small accident at work last night. Nothing serious, you understand, just a fall down some stairs. Clumsy of him. But accidents do seem to run in your family, don't they? After Harrison left, Sarah and Richard sat in stunned silence, the legal document lying between them like a death warrant. Through the window, they watched the black sedan pull away, but Sarah knew there would be others. The net was closing around them with the inexorable precision of a machine designed to crush anything that stood in its way. "We need help," Richard said finally, his voice hollow. Sarah nodded, her mind racing through possibilities and dangers, calculating risks and potential allies. There was only one person powerful enough to stand against Harrison and his consortium. Only one person who might care enough about Helena's memory to risk everything for her daughter. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her green eyes blazing with a determination that would have made her mother proud. "I think it's time you called my uncle." Ahmad al-Rashid answered Richard's call on the first ring, as if he'd been sitting beside his phone waiting for this exact moment. His voice carried across the international connection with crystal clarity, though Sarah could hear the weight of years and grief beneath the formal politeness. "Mr. Blackwood, I wondered when I would hear from you again." Richard glanced at Sarah, seeing his own nervousness reflected in her green eyes. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer with complete honesty. Did you recognize Sarah yesterday in that conference room?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch across continents, from Chicago to wherever Ahmad was staying. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in the quiet, could feel the weight of 15 years of secrets hanging in the balance of whatever he might say next. When Ahmad finally spoke, his voice was heavy with old pain and carefully suppressed emotion. "She has Helena's eyes, the same green eyes that haunted my dreams when my sister disappeared. The same way of tilting her head when she concentrates, the same graceful hands that our mother possessed." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She grabbed the phone from Richard's hand, her voice shaking with emotion she could no longer contain. "Uncle Ahmad, it's Sarah." "Ya Habibti," Ahmad's voice broke, the Arabic endearment carrying all the love and grief of a man who had lost his sister and spent 15 years wondering if he would ever find the niece he'd never had the chance to know. "My precious niece, I have been searching for you for so very long." Tears streamed down Sarah's face, cutting tracks through the exhaustion and fear that had marked her features since yesterday's revelations. You knew I existed." "I suspected, child. After Helena disappeared, after she chose love over family, over everything we had been raised to believe was important, I hired investigators. The best money could buy. They found traces of her new life, a marriage certificate in Las Vegas, immigration records, a birth certificate for one Sarah Mitchell born in Denver, Colorado." Ahmad paused, and Sarah could hear him struggling with emotion across the thousands of miles that separated them. "But then the trail went cold, as if you and your father had simply vanished from the earth. I began to fear that the consortium had found you first, that I had lost you the same way I lost my beloved sister." "Someone threatened us today," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength as she felt the presence of family, real family, for the first time in her adult life. "A man named James Harrison. He wants me to sign away my inheritance, to disappear back into hiding." Ahmad's voice turned deadly cold, carrying the weight of power and influence that came from controlling billions of dollars in petroleum assets. "Harrison, yes, I know him well. He represents the consortium that has been systematically stealing from our family for 15 years, using Helena's supposed death to justify their theft." Uncle Ahmad, they killed my mother. They murdered her because she tried to claim what was rightfully hers." "I know, child." The pain in his voice was raw and immediate, as if the wound was still fresh. And I have spent every single day since her death planning how to make them pay for what they took from us, from me, from you, from the world itself. Richard took the phone back, his businessman's mind already calculating the implications of what he was hearing. Mr. Al-Rashid, Sarah is in immediate danger. Harrison made direct threats against her life, and there are people watching her. We need help, and we need it fast. No more threats, Ahmad said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who had never learned to accept defeat. No more hiding, no more running, no more fear. I'm flying back to Chicago tonight on my private jet. Tell Sarah to trust no one except you until I arrive. The consortium has people everywhere, in law enforcement, in government, in business. They have spent years building a network designed to protect their theft. What can we do until then? Richard asked. Survive, Ahmad said grimly, and prepare for war. Because that is what this has become, Mr. Blackwood. A war for justice, for family, for the memory of a woman who deserved so much better than the death they gave her. After the call ended, Sarah felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, as if a weight she'd carried her entire life had suddenly been lifted. The frightened girl who cleaned office buildings and hid in shadows was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood her true heritage. She was the daughter of Helena al-Rashid, niece to one of the most powerful men in the Middle East, heir to a fortune that could reshape entire economies. More importantly, she was no longer alone in a battle that had already claimed her mother's life. But first, she had to live long enough to claim what was rightfully hers. Through the diner window, she saw another black car pulling into the parking lot, its occupants making no effort to conceal their surveillance. The hunters were growing bolder, more confident, preparing for what they clearly believed would be an easy victory. Mr. Blackwood, she said, standing up with a determination that would have made Helena proud, I hope you're ready for this, because tomorrow everything changes. Richard looked at this young woman who had transformed before his eyes, from victim to warrior, from frightened child to rightful heir, and realized he was witnessing the awakening of a force that would shake the very foundations of the international oil industry. The daughter of Helena al-Rashid was finally coming home to claim her birthright, and God help anyone who tried to stop her. Ahmad al-Rashid's private jet touched down at O'Hare International Airport at precisely 11:47 p.m., its sleek form cutting through the Chicago darkness like a silver arrow. Sarah pressed her face against the window of Richard's car as they watched the plane taxi toward the private terminal, her heart hammering with a mixture of anticipation and terror. He's really here, she whispered, still unable to believe that after 15 years of hiding, family had finally come to find her. The man who emerged from the aircraft was not the same person Sarah had met in the conference room. Gone was the polite businessman in his Western suit. Ahmad al-Rashid now moved with the fluid authority of desert royalty, flanked by 4 men whose eyes never stopped scanning for threats. He wore traditional robes that seemed to shimmer in the airport lights, and when his gaze found Sarah through the terminal glass, she saw the fierce love of a man who had never stopped grieving his lost sister. "My niece," he said simply when they met in the private lounge, and Sarah found herself enveloped in an embrace that smelled of expensive cologne and distant spices. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt truly safe. But the reunion was brief. Ahmad's expression hardened as he turned to Richard. "How many are watching us?" "At least 6 cars since we left the motel," Richard replied grimly. "They're not even trying to hide anymore." Ahmad nodded, unsurprised. "Harrison believes he holds all the cards. He thinks a frightened girl and a desperate businessman pose no real threat to his consortium." His smile was sharp as a blade. "He is about to learn how wrong he is." One of Ahmad's security team approached, speaking in rapid Arabic. Sarah understood every word. "They have surrounded the building. 12 men, armed, waiting for orders. "Uncle," Sarah said in Arabic, causing the security chief's eyebrows to rise in surprise, "they want us to run. It's a trap." Ahmad's eyes gleamed with pride and something darker. "Then we don't run, Habibti. We spring the trap on them." He gestured to his men, who immediately began moving with military precision. "Richard, Sarah, stay close. Tonight, the Al-Rashid family reclaims what was stolen from us." As they moved through the airport's corridors, Sarah felt the weight of her heritage settling on her shoulders like armor. She was no longer the janitor's daughter. She was Helena al-Rashid's heir, and the war for her birthright was about to begin. Through the terminal windows, she could see Harrison's men repositioning, confident in their numerical advantage. They had no idea they were hunting a man who controlled private armies and had been planning this moment for 15 years. "Uncle Ahmad," Sarah said as they reached the exit, "what exactly are we walking into?" His smile was fierce with anticipation. "Justice, my dear niece. Finally, after so many years, justice." The confrontation began before they even reached the parking lot. Harrison's men moved to surround Ahmad's small group, their confidence evident in their casual positioning. They expected sheep walking to slaughter, not wolves preparing to hunt. "Mr. Al-Rashid," Harrison's voice carried across the tarmac from behind a black SUV, amplified by some kind of speaker system. "How good of you to join us, though I must say your timing is rather inconvenient." Ahmad stepped forward, his traditional robes billowing in the Chicago wind, looking every inch the desert prince his heritage proclaimed him to be. "The only inconvenience, Harrison, is how long it has taken me to find my niece. Your niece is in possession of documents that belong to my clients. She will sign them, and this unfortunate matter will be resolved quietly." Sarah felt her uncle's hand on her shoulder, warm and reassuring despite the deadly situation surrounding them. "Sarah belongs to no one, and she will sign nothing. The Al-Rashid fortune returns to the Al-Rashid family tonight." Harrison laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete structures around them. "You seem to misunderstand the situation, Ahmad. You are outnumbered, outgunned, and operating in hostile territory. Your family's influence means nothing here." "Doesn't it?" Ahmad's voice carried a note of amusement that made Sarah look at him sharply. "Tell me, Harrison, have you checked your offshore accounts recently?" The silence that followed stretched taut as a wire. Sarah could practically feel Harrison's confidence wavering across the distance. "What did you do?" Harrison's voice had lost its smooth assurance. "What I should have done 15 years ago," Ahmad replied. "I bought your consortium piece by piece. The Meridian Oil Holding Company, mine as of 6 hours ago. Petroflex International. I acquired controlling interest last month. Even your precious Swiss bank accounts are now under investigation by authorities who work for me." Sarah stared at her uncle in awe. While she had been running and hiding, he had been systematically dismantling the empire built on her mother's blood money. "You're lying!" Harrison snarled, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. Ahmad pulled out his phone, tapping the screen once. Instantly, every cell phone carried by Harrison's men began ringing simultaneously. Sarah watched in fascination as confusion rippled through their ranks. "Check your phones, gentlemen," Ahmad called out. "You'll find termination notices from new management. Your services are no longer required." One by one, Harrison's men began lowering their weapons, reading the official documents that had appeared on their screens. They had been employees, not fanatics, and their loyalty extended only as far as their paychecks. "This isn't over," Harrison shouted, but he was already backing toward a remaining vehicle. "Oh, but it is," Ahmad replied. "Sarah, would you like to tell Mr. Harrison what we discussed on the plane?" Sarah stepped forward, feeling power flow through her veins like electricity. "James Harrison, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, international money laundering, and the wrongful death of Helena Al-Rashid Mitchell." Blue and red lights suddenly blazed from every corner of the airport as FBI vehicles surrounded the remaining consortium members. Sarah realized that her uncle had orchestrated this entire confrontation, drawing Harrison into the open where justice could finally reach him. As Harrison was led away in handcuffs, screaming threats that no one would listen to, Ahmad turned to his niece with gentle eyes. "Your mother would be proud, Habibti. The family honor is restored." But even as Sarah felt the weight of victory, she sensed that the real battle was just beginning. Money could be recovered, companies could be bought, but the consortium had roots that went deeper than Harrison, deeper than any one man's greed. Somewhere in the shadows, the real puppet masters were already planning their next move. 3 days after Harrison's arrest, Sarah sat in the penthouse office of Blackwood Industries, now fully owned by Al Rashid Holdings, staring at documents that revealed the true scope of her mother's murder. The conspiracy went far beyond oil money, reaching into the highest levels of international finance and government. "The consortium wasn't just stealing from your family," Richard explained, spreading photographs across the mahogany conference table. "They were using Al-Rashid assets as collateral for illegal arms deals, drug money laundering, even human trafficking operations." Ahmad studied the evidence with the cold precision of a man who had spent decades in the petroleum business, where fortunes could be made or lost on a single decision. "Helena discovered this, didn't she? That's why they killed her." Sarah nodded, pieces of her childhood memories finally making sense. She started getting phone calls at night. Strange men would come to the house. Dad would send me to my room, but I could hear her crying afterward. She tried to expose them through legal channels, Ahmad continued, his voice heavy with guilt. "If I had supported her then, instead of choosing family tradition over justice." "You couldn't have known," Sarah said gently, though she could see the weight of 15 years of regret in her uncle's eyes. But their moment of reflection was interrupted by the sharp buzz of Ahmad's secure phone. He answered in Arabic, his face darkening with each word. When he hung up, his expression was grim. "What is it?" Richard asked. "A Harrison was found dead in his federal holding cell 2 hours ago. Apparent suicide." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. They killed him to keep him quiet. "And now they know we're close to exposing the full network," Ahmad said grimly. "Harrison was just the Chicago representative. The real power behind the consortium operates from Geneva, Dubai, and Moscow." Richard moved to the window, looking out over the city that had become their battlefield. "So what do we do?" Ahmad was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute determination. "We go to the source. Sarah, pack your bags. We're flying to Geneva. Is that safe?" Richard asked. "Nowhere is safe," Ahmad replied. "But Geneva is where they keep the records that will destroy them. It's also where they'll try to kill us." Sarah stood up, feeling her mother's courage flowing through her veins. "Then that's where we need to be." But as they prepared to leave Chicago, none of them noticed the figure watching from the building across the street. A woman with cold eyes and expensive clothes, speaking quietly into a satellite phone. The consortium's true leader had arrived in Chicago, and she had no intention of letting Helena al-Rashid's daughter reach Geneva alive. The woman who entered Ahmad's penthouse suite the next morning looked like she belonged in a boardroom, not a battlefield. Elegant, silver-haired, and dressed in a perfectly tailored Chanel suit, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had never been denied anything she truly wanted. Sarah looked up from packing her suitcase to find this stranger standing in their private elevator, having somehow bypassed 3 levels of security that Ahmad had personally supervised. "Hello, Sarah," the woman said in accented English that spoke of Swiss finishing schools and international banking. "My name is Victoria Pemberton. I believe it's time we had a conversation." Ahmad appeared from the bedroom, his hand moving instinctively toward the security alarm, but Victoria raised her hand in a gesture that somehow commanded absolute attention. "Please, Ahmad, there's no need for dramatics. I came here to talk, not to fight, to—" "You're the one," Sarah said, recognition dawning like a cold sunrise. "You're the real head of the consortium." Victoria smiled, the expression transforming her features from merely elegant to genuinely beautiful. "Among other things, yes. Though I prefer to think of myself as a problem solver." "You solved my mother by having her murdered," Sarah said, anger making her voice sharp as broken glass. "Your mother was brilliant, passionate, and utterly naive about how the world really works," Victoria replied, settling into one of the leather chairs, as if she'd been invited. She believed that justice and law were the same thing. That idealism made her dangerous to a great many people. Richard had arrived from his office, his face pale as he recognized the woman who had somehow penetrated their most secure location. "How did you get in here?" Victoria's smile widened. "Richard, dear, I've owned this building since before you ever dreamed of starting your little technology company. Every security system, every camera, every guard, they all work for me." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. They had never been safe. Every move they'd made, every plan they'd formed, had been monitored and reported to the woman sitting before them with the casual confidence of a chess master who had just revealed checkmate. "What do you want?" Ahmad asked, his voice controlled but deadly. "What I've always wanted: stability, order. The smooth functioning of a system that took decades to build." Victoria crossed her legs elegantly. "Sarah's existence threatens that stability. Helena's inheritance, properly handled, supports countless legitimate businesses, governments, and charitable organizations worldwide. Built on murder and theft," Sarah said flatly. "Built on pragmatism and vision," Victoria corrected. "Your mother's idealistic crusade would have destabilized governments, collapsed currencies, and caused suffering for millions of innocent people." Ahmad stepped protectively closer to Sarah. "So you killed her." "I made a difficult decision for the greater good." Victoria's voice carried no trace of guilt or remorse. "And now I'm offering Sarah the same choice I offered her mother 15 years ago." She reached into her purse and withdrew a document that looked depressingly familiar. Another renunciation of claim, another attempt to buy Sarah's silence with the promise of a normal life. "Sign this, and you can disappear back into obscurity. Refuse, and—" Victoria shrugged eloquently, "and you'll kill me like you killed my mother. I'll solve the problem in the most efficient way possible." Victoria stood up, smoothing her skirt with practiced grace. "You have 24 hours to decide. After that, the choice will be made for you." As Victoria moved toward the elevator, Sarah called out, her voice strong despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Victoria, my mother was right about one thing. Justice and law aren't the same, but they should be, and I'm going to make sure they are." Victoria paused at the elevator doors, looking back with something that might have been respect. "Your mother said something very similar just before she died. I hope you're smarter than she was, Sarah. I really do." The elevator doors closed with a soft whisper, leaving 3 people staring at the space where their most dangerous enemy had stood. "She's not going to give us 24 hours, Ahmad said grimly. Sarah nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Then we don't wait. We go to Geneva tonight." "It's a trap," Richard warned. "Everything is a trap now," Sarah replied, feeling her mother's courage burning in her chest like a flame that could never be extinguished. "But that doesn't mean we can't spring it on them, instead of letting them spring it on us." The final battle for Helena al-Rashid's legacy was about to begin, and this time Sarah was ready to fight fire with fire. Geneva's private airport gleamed like a jewel against the Swiss Alps as Ahmad's jet descended through the early morning mist. Sarah pressed her face against the window, watching the city wake up below them. A city built on discretion, international finance, and secrets that could topple governments. "Once we land, there's no going back," Ahmad said quietly, checking his watch against local time. "Victoria will have people waiting for us." Sarah nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the locket her mother had given her, the one piece of jewelry Helena had kept from her old life. Inside was a photograph of Ahmad and Helena as children, playing in the gardens of their family compound in Dubai, both of them laughing with the innocent joy of youth. "Uncle Ahmad," she said softly, "tell me about the bank." Ahmad's expression darkened. "Crédit Genève International. It's been the consortium's primary financial instrument for 30 years. Every illegal transaction, every stolen asset, every drop of blood money has flowed through their accounts. And the records? Stored in a vault 7 stories beneath the city, protected by security systems that make military installations look vulnerable." Ahmad paused, studying his niece's determined face. "Sarah, what we're planning is essentially impossible." Richard looked up from his laptop, where he'd been coordinating with contacts in the Swiss financial community. "I've confirmed Victoria's location. She's staying at the Grand Hotel Kempinski, and she's requested a meeting with us this afternoon." "Another trap," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "Undoubtedly, but also an opportunity." Ahmad smiled grimly. "While she's busy trying to eliminate us, we'll be accessing those bank records." Sarah turned to her uncle, seeing not just the grieving brother who had spent 15 years seeking justice, but the brilliant businessman who had built an empire from desert sand and political acumen. "You have a plan?" she said. "It wasn't a question. Your mother and I used to play chess when we were children," Ahmad replied. "She always complained that I thought too many moves ahead, that I made the game complicated when it should be simple. But she never understood that the most effective victories come from making your opponent think they've won, right up until the moment they realize they've lost everything." He pulled out a small device that looked like an ordinary smartphone but clearly wasn't. "Swiss banking laws are very strict about privacy, but they make exceptions for matters of national security. What if those bank records revealed not just financial crimes, but evidence of terrorist funding?" Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. "You're going to frame the consortium for terrorism. I'm going to expose them for what they really are, international criminals who have been using stolen money to destabilize entire regions for profit." Ahmad's smile was sharp as a scimitar. "The Swiss government will have no choice but to seize every account, every document, every piece of evidence." Richard whistled softly. "Victoria will never see it coming." "She'll see it," Ahmad corrected, "but she won't be able to stop it. That's the difference between planning for 15 years and reacting to events." As their plane touched down on Swiss soil, Sarah felt her mother's presence surrounding her like armor. Helena al-Rashid had died trying to expose the truth, but her daughter was about to finish what she'd started. The final chess match was about to begin, and this time the al-Rashid family was playing to win, not just the game, but the war itself. Through the airplane window, Sarah could see black cars already positioning themselves around the terminal. Victoria's people were ready for them, but they had no idea what was about to hit them. "Uncle Ahmad," Sarah said, her green eyes blazing with determination that would have made her mother proud. "Let's go get our family's honor back." The plane rolled to a stop, and Sarah al-Rashid Mitchell prepared to claim her birthright, or die trying. The Grand Hotel Kempinski's crystal chandelier cast prismatic light across the marble floor as Sarah al-Rashid Mitchell walked through the lobby with the measured pace of royalty approaching her throne. Gone were the cleaning supplies and worn sneakers. She now wore a designer suit that spoke of power and unlimited resources, her auburn hair styled to frame features that proclaimed her al-Rashid heritage to anyone with eyes to see. Victoria Pemberton waited in the penthouse restaurant, positioned at a table overlooking Lake Geneva, every inch the aristocratic matriarch who had controlled international finance for 3 decades. Her smile was arctic as Sarah approached. "You look lovely, dear, much more like your mother than I expected." Sarah took her seat with fluid grace, her green eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "Thank you, though I understand you knew my mother quite well before you had her murdered." Straight to business, how refreshingly direct. Victoria signaled the waiter for champagne, as if they were celebrating rather than preparing for war. "I trust you've considered my generous offer?" "I have." Sarah reached into her purse and withdrew the renunciation document, placing it on the white tablecloth between them. "I've decided not to sign it." Victoria's composure never wavered, but something predatory flickered behind her eyes. How unfortunate. "I had hoped you would be more pragmatic than Helena." "I am more pragmatic than my mother," Sarah replied calmly. "She tried to work within the system. She believed in law and justice and the power of truth. I've learned that sometimes you have to become the system." At that moment, every phone in the restaurant began buzzing simultaneously. Victoria glanced at her device, and for the first time, Sarah saw genuine surprise cross her elegant features. "What have you done?" Victoria whispered. Sarah smiled, and in that expression, Victoria finally saw not Helena al-Rashid's frightened daughter, but the true heir to one of the most powerful families in the world. "I've done what my mother couldn't do 15 years ago. I've exposed everything." Through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see Swiss police vehicles surrounding the Crédit Genève International building 6 blocks away. News helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures, broadcasting live footage of federal agents removing box after box of evidence from the bank's vault. The Swiss Financial Crimes Commission received an anonymous tip about terrorist funding flowing through consortium accounts, Sarah continued, her voice steady as stone. "They discovered that the same money stolen from my family has been used to finance arms deals in Syria, drug cartels in Colombia, and human trafficking rings across 3 continents." Victoria's champagne glass trembled slightly in her manicured hand. "You can't prove any connection between those activities and legitimate al-Rashid assets." "Actually, I can." Sarah pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table. "Every transaction, every account number, every forged document authorizing the theft of my mother's inheritance, all of it traced directly to you." Victoria stared at the screen, watching 30 years of carefully constructed financial architecture crumble in real time. "How?" "The security was impenetrable." "You made one critical mistake," Sarah said, leaning back in her chair with the confidence of a woman who had finally claimed her birthright. "You underestimated how much my mother actually knew." She opened the locket at her throat, the same one Victoria had seen her wear as a child. Inside, where Victoria had always assumed there was merely a sentimental photograph, was a microdrive containing 15 years' worth of financial records that Helena had painstakingly gathered before her death. "My mother wasn't trying to claim her inheritance through legal channels," Sarah continued, watching Victoria's face drain of color. "She was building a case to expose the entire consortium. She recorded every conversation, photographed every document, traced every stolen dollar, and she hid all of it in the one place she knew you'd never think to look." Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. "This isn't over." "I have resources you can't imagine." "Had resources," Sarah corrected, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just inherited control of a multi-billion-dollar empire. "As of this morning, every consortium asset has been frozen by international banking authorities. Every account, every investment, every hidden fund has been traced and seized." Through the restaurant windows, they could see Victoria's security team being led away in handcuffs. The net Ahmad had spent 15 years weaving was finally closing, and there was no escape. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly, her voice losing its edge as she saw Victoria's aristocratic mask finally cracking. "Something my mother discovered about you that she never got the chance to reveal." Victoria sank back into her chair, looking suddenly older than her 60 years. "What?" Sarah reached across the table, placing a photograph beside the tablet. It showed a much younger Victoria standing beside a man in military uniform, both of them smiling at the camera with obvious affection. "Colonel James Pemberton, British intelligence, killed in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan 20 years ago," Sarah said gently. "You weren't always the head of a criminal consortium, Victoria. You were a grieving widow who made a terrible choice when the insurance money wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle you'd built together." For the first time in their conversation, Victoria's composure completely shattered. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the weight of 2 decades of escalating crimes finally crushed the last remnants of the woman she had once been. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. "It started with one small investment, one tiny compromise. But each choice led to another and another until you forgot who you used to be," Sarah finished. "My mother understood that. She actually felt sorry for you." Victoria looked up sharply. "Then why?" "Because feeling sorry for you didn't mean she would let you destroy other families the way you destroyed your own soul." Swiss police entered the restaurant at that moment, moving with the efficient precision of a well-coordinated operation. As they placed handcuffs on Victoria's wrists, she looked back at Sarah one final time. "You won," she said simply. "We all lost," Sarah replied sadly. "Some of us just lost less than others." An hour later, Sarah stood on the hotel's terrace, overlooking Lake Geneva, with Ahmad and Richard beside her. The autumn air was crisp with the promise of winter, but she felt warm. Not from the sun, but from the knowledge that her mother's spirit could finally rest in peace. "So what happens now?" Richard asked, still struggling to process the magnitude of what he'd witnessed. Ahmad smiled, looking more at peace than Sarah had ever seen him. "Now Sarah takes her rightful place as head of Al Rashid Holdings. The consortium's stolen assets will be returned to their rightful owners, and the profits will fund hospitals, schools, and clean water projects across the developing world. And the consortium itself will serve as an example," Sarah said firmly. "Every member, every collaborator, every person who profited from my mother's murder will face justice." Richard nodded, then paused as if remembering something. "Sarah, there's one thing I still don't understand. In that first meeting, when you spoke Arabic to your uncle, how did you know he would help you? How could you be sure he wasn't part of the conspiracy?" Sarah smiled, touching the locket that had held her family's salvation for 15 years. "Because of something my mother told me before she died. She said that blood calls to blood, and that no matter how far we traveled or how long we hid, family would always find family." She looked out over the lake, where the setting sun painted the water gold and crimson. "Uncle Ahmad spent 15 years searching for me, not because he wanted to control me or use me, but because he loved my mother and refused to let her sacrifice be meaningless. That kind of love, you can see it in someone's eyes if you know what to look for." "And now?" Ahmad asked gently. Sarah al-Rashid Mitchell, no longer the janitor's daughter, but the rightful heir to one of the world's great fortunes, straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin with the pride of a woman who had fought for justice and won. "Now we go home," she said, "all of us. All. And we build something beautiful from the ashes of what was stolen." As the Swiss evening settled around them, Sarah felt her mother's presence one final time, not as grief or loss, but as approval and love. Helena al-Rashid's daughter had not only survived the war that claimed her mother's life, she had ended it forever. The girl who had once cleaned office buildings now controlled an empire. But more importantly, she had restored honor to her family name and ensured that her mother's death would never be forgotten. Justice, at last, had come home.